Oh, hello. Hey, what's going on? It's Trey from Imagine Just Records. And today I want to tell you a story about one of my favorite bands. I want to tell you about an album that we've heard a million times. The crazy thing about it is this album has so many stories that you'd ever think of or could ever imagine. The album I want to talk about today is Led Zeppelin II. Welcome back, guys. So I want to tell you guys about a story. I want to tell you a story about an album that we've heard so many times. It's one of the most, I would say, played records in our vinyl collection. Now, we all know this album behind me. It's probably one of the most sought-after records. We all have it in our collection. But the thing about this album that we all don't know is it has a story. Now, it has a story far beyond... it has crooks. It has guys that were basically like the mafia. It has so many different things. But we're going to start off our story about Led Zeppelin II. We're going to start it off with a man named Peter Grant. Now, Peter Grant was a really, really big man. He's kind of a guy that you wouldn't really want to catch in an alley, if you know what I mean. And he was Led Zeppelin's manager. Peter Grant was actually a wrestler at one time. He was, his job basically to hire by Led Zeppelin was when Led Zeppelin would play gigs, Peter Grant would be the one that would get the money. A lot of times these promoters back in the days, in the 70s, they were always trying to get over on bands. And Peter Grant, he made sure that Led Zeppelin got paid. That's what Peter Grant did. So let's fast forward and get to where we're going. Now, another man that we all heard of is by the name of Robert Ludwig. Now, Robert Ludwig is one of the best engineers. He's done masters for Ozzy Osbourne. He's done masters for Fleetwood Mac. He's done masters for Pink Floyd. You name it, and he's done it. Now, the thing with Robert Ludwig was Robert Ludwig and Jimmy Page had a really good relationship. Jimmy Page, which is the guitar player, like most guitar players like myself, we all want the guitars to stand out. And if you've heard this album, you know that the guitars stand out. So we're in the studio, and Robert Ludwig and Jimmy Page are sitting there. And what they're doing is they're putting the final touches on the album. Now the thing is, with this album, it was going to be Led Zeppelin's second album. One had already done pretty well, but the sky was the limit for this record. This record was going to be the real cash cow where they were going to make a lot of money. So Jimmy Page wanted it perfect. So he came to Robert Ludwig. He said, hey, I want this master to be hot. I want this to be one of the crunchiest, hardest records that anyone's ever heard. So Robert Ludwig, with his mastering, he mastered it extra hot. So he mastered it extra hot, and they went down the road to a friend that had a really nice collection, not a collection, but a stereo system. So Robert Ludwig put it in, he listened to the mix, and it was hot. It sounded great. It sounded like something you've never really heard of. So this goes back to the studio, and Jimmy Page is listening to it. He gets all the guys in the band to listen to it, and they absolutely love it. So they put their stamp of approval on it, and out it goes. So it goes out to the masses. Well, the guy that was actually the president of the label got a hold of Led Zeppelin II. He took it home to his daughter. Well, his daughter, most like a lot of young kids back in those days, had those small, just really cheap stereo systems. So she put Led Zeppelin II that she had got from her father. She dropped the needle, and it began to skip. The master was too hot. Most of the kids that had cheap record players, not like this one's not cheap, but most kids that had the cheap record players, they had the hot master. So as soon as that record dropped, it just bounced all over the place. The needle, it was too hot. So the next day, the owner of the record label, he comes in and he goes, I want all of them to come back. Every one of them. Bring them all back. Well, some have already sold. So the ones that were left out were very rare. So this takes us back to Peter Grant. Now Peter Grant was this big man that was very intimidating, and he always wanted Led Zeppelin's records to sound the best. So if you know anything about the lacquer in those days, classical music would go first, the jazz music would go next, the rhythm and blues. Rock and roll was always last because rock and roll was more forgiving. There was more noise. So Peter Grant would make sure he would go to those record plants, and in California it was the Monarch press. So he'd go there early and he would use his size and his intimidation, and sometimes he would, give them money, and he would try to make sure that he could kind of pay them off. And they'd get Led Zeppelin right there. If you could think of it this way, you go to McDonald's, and when you take those chicken nuggets and you put it in the grease, that's the absolute best those chicken nuggets are going to cost, or taste, excuse me. The longer that people keep putting chicken nuggets in there and fries and stuff, it's not going to taste as good. With records, it's the same thing. So Peter Grant got the Monarch pressings to sound really well. So I'm going to tell you how some of those records got out, and actually the one right behind me, this is an RL. This is a hot mix, and it's from the Monarch plant. Now the way that you can tell is if you look in the runout groove, it'll say RL and SS. RL for Robert Ludwig and SS for Sterling Sound. Now if you flipped it over and you looked in the runout groove again, if you see RL, SS, then you have a Robert Ludwig hot mix. And if you've ever heard the hot mix, you should check it out. That's what this is. The crazy story about this record now is I went to a small little, they had books and they had a couple records. Now, anytime I saw Led Zeppelin II, like you guys are probably going to do now, anytime you just open it up, check out the runout groove, because this day I found an RLSS and I paid $3.99. That's a story for you guys. I appreciate you guys for hanging out. I'm Trey from Imagine Just Records. Now you all know the story about Led Zeppelin II. Good hunting, trying to find it. Take care, guys. Hello, it's Trey with Imagine Just Records. And today, we're going to talk about the band Led Zeppelin. Do you know the band Led Zeppelin? Lennon? Do you know the band Led Zeppelin? I know the band Led Zeppelin. And we're going to talk about Led Zeppelin II.